Jerika. I use she, her.
Hi, I'm a mystery person. My name's Haley, and I use she, her.
And I'm Jay, your DM. I use he, him. And this is Insight Check, where we delve into the dungeon of your bad decisions to retrieve the treasure of wisdom.
Jay, before we begin,
yes,
I would like you to do a comparative analysis of how Will Muzzy plays cat people and how Jerika plays cat people. Go.
Okay, this is actually really interesting. Actually, this is fascinating because
I've been wondering for a while.
Because Will Muzzy really leans into the, grumpy cat, antisocial kind of, I don't care about human needs sort of angle of the cat person. I feel like Will Muzzy's character is a very dry, sardonic take on, what if a cat had the ability to speak? Whereas I feel like your character is more of this is a character who exhibits animalistic traits.
Yeah. And she's also meant to also kind of personify them,
very matronly
instinct. And that sort of
But it's funny because
nature.
it's not motherly in the sense that that exhibits to other players.
Right.
It is very much it's really sad. It really is
it is.
And the other players don't get it. The other players don't I understand what you're doing when you're doing it, and I'm just wow, thank you. You've broken my heart.
They don't know yet. They
don't get it.
Sometime in the future they might.
Yeah, it flies right over their heads, and I'm like, oh my God, you guys, you don't know what she just did, but it was really sad. Anyway, so I guess I would say Will plays a cat that can talk, and you play a person that has cat traits. I feel like those are the sort of
approaching
dynamics
it from the
Will's is more funny. Will's is very humorous, whereas yours is
I got a shovel.
Yeah, it's got more emotions.
And I'll whack you. Haley, do you have any thoughts about being a cat person or RPing a feline?
I think that I would just my character would have to be anything, any flat surface that they walked by.
Mm-hmm.
They'd have to knock stuff off.
I love that. That's the.
I feel like Haley's cat person would be the cute aspects of a cat, right?
A little bit. It would be all of a sudden you look around for Haley and where is she? Oh, there's a box over there. She's in it.
That's cute.
Or oh, I'm going to this drink you wanted to drink. Oh, it's on the ground.
Yeah. Very. I mean, listen, I have 3 cats and I live in basically a 1-bedroom apartment, effectively. So it is, that's my life every day.
Just stuff. Here, I'll just drop stuff.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. I have a humidifier they just love to knock over.
No. Yeah, it's most satisfying if there's liquid in it.
This is not cat play check. This is insight check. And we're gonna, that's a first dungeon crawl, playing cats. And I do think it's interesting to think about. For my dungeon crawl, I'm going to bring up the major topic of the episode, which is we're talking about Westmarches today. And Westmarches are a style of play. And for more details, you can actually go to a website called Ars Ludi. And we'll give a link on our Twitter. ARSLUDI. So Westmarches is a style of game where you basically begin and end each session at the same location. So basically each session is sort of a one-shot. And the second aspect is that the player base in a game that is a Westmarches can kind of change between each session. So it is designed for sort of drop-in, drop-out play by a large group. So if you can get 8-10 players together into a Westmarches campaign, then whenever 4 players want to play and they can agree on a time, then they just play, those 4 players. And they run a mission out into whatever their setting is, and then they get back to base by the end of the session, and then a different group can play the next session, because everybody's always ending up back at base, so to speak. So there's no real, ongoing storyline where, oh, well, we can't play until we have these 4 people back together because we ended the session in the middle of that adventure. You can do that, but that's not sort of the intent of Westmarches style play. And then the third thing, generally speaking, is that you start in a unmapped wild geography. A great example, my cousin is running Westmarches right now, where a military group has found a new continent, and they have set up a forward operating base on that continent that is basically isolated now, because a kraken came and destroyed the ship that dropped them off. So they have this group of people on this island, and they make adventures out into the wilderness to get supplies that they need to survive, call for help, and things like that. So each time they get together, they run a mission into the wilderness. They learn a little bit about the surrounding area. They map out the island a little more, and then they go back to base, and then a different group can play next time.
And if there's information sharing, you can have a longer running sort of thread, like, oh, we uncovered this about the woods. Oh, that means this is this, and blah, blah, blah. Yeah.
Of course, sometimes the reality of D&D is that you will be in the middle of a session and realize you're out of time. But the intention of a Westmarches is that you go out and return to base each time. So it's great for players who maybe can't commit to a weekly game, but would like to play D&D more. You can join a Westmarches, and then whenever there's a session on a day that you can catch, then you just jump in. And then, if there's a session or a couple sessions that you can't catch, you leave it alone. It's important in a Westmarches, and it's actually in the rules for the Westmarches, that detailed notes are taken on each adventure and shared with the rest of the party. Because obviously you got people missing a lot of sessions, so they want to be able to sort of come back, read what's been going on, and know sort of what the general gist of things is. So I just wanted to give a shout out to the person who made all this before we go deeper into...
Robbins!
Yeah, exactly.
Ben Robbins!
But this whole episode's going to be about Westmarches. And Ben Robbins!
Ben Robbins!
Ben Robbins!
I am excited to learn more about Westmarches, as my absence from the pod indicates I have not had a lot of time to do things lately. But I'm excited to learn more about cool game things.
Yeah, it's really interesting way of playing. My cousin's been running one lately, so I've been sort of reading up on them and helping him plan out his, and sort of living vicariously through his campaign adventure stories.
And I've been playing in one.
Oh, really? That's cool. So we have DM perspective and player perspective. That's really nice. My cousin has actually just started running a game. I think he'll be running it Monday, where he's going to be letting 2 other people DM for him in the world. And then he's going to sort of be giving them feedback and stuff. And then once he's really confident that they understand the setting and won't break it, he's going to let them start running games for the Westmarch campaign too, which is another really big advantage of a Westmarches campaign. You can trade off DMs between sessions.
This is my my guess. Jay would hate Westmarches.
I like it conceptually.
Yeah, a control freak, Jay.
I really like big, dramatic, moving stories. Like, not moving like emotionally. I don't think I get as emotional as I should sometimes, but I like stories that are like always have a lot of momentum. Like there's always like something happening.
Speaking of stories with a lot of momentum, Lost Minds of Fandelver. Not really, but that's okay. My dungeon crawl is that I DM'd for my coworkers last week.
Oh, awesome.
Cool.
And it went really well. Everyone was very creative and played to their characters. We used the pre-gens that come with the starter set. And we had 2 veterans who had played 5e before, and one who had played maybe 2e, etc. It was great, and there was a lot of like assumptions based on popular tropes, and so they were making decisions based on things that they assumed were happening, which was great. And it was fun.
Was there a favorite moment?
My favorite moment.
Good question.
So they entered basically King Grol's room in Cragmaw Castle, and someone asked, "Is there a chest here?" And I was like, "Yeah, there's a chest." Sure, of course. Why not?
Yeah.
And the rogue attempted to lockpick it. Didn't
Sure.
work. And then they had like the fighter and the cleric like smashing on it.
Oh my goodness.
And it took a while. And what they found inside were discarded maps from from dwarves.
Oh, that's good
everything that
though.
was in there.
That's a really interesting reward because it's like valuable, but not maybe immediately valuable in the way the players might have expected.
Yes, indeed.
I really like that.
There was definitely one that was like, dang, no gold.
Yeah, exactly. Like the idea when you pick a chest, oh, there's gonna be like a sword or gold in here.
Yeah.
Really great moment from Matt Colville's session recently. They picked a chest and this guy saw the most beautiful hammer he's ever seen before, and he like reached in and grabbed it, and everybody else saw he was holding this like really crappy, rusted, broken hammer. It was just cursed. So as soon as he saw it, he thought it was amazing. So he was like running around with a negative to attack and thinking he's swinging the greatest hammer ever made, like Mjolnir.
Fascinating.
So funny.
Interesting.
Yeah, least favorite moment?
Ooh.
D&D's D&D warts and all, right?
Also a good question.
It's hard to think of your least favorite moment, isn't it?
Well, so it really depends on how you're defining least favorite. I think as far as tactile immersion goes, I wasn't too pleased when we found out that Gundren was covered in glue, because that didn't make me happy to like visualize on myself.
Yeah, yuck.
As far as things that I would do differently, I think I would have treated the dragon a little differently. So in my version, which is a little condensed compared to the actual adventure, Venom Fang is being questioned in Cragmaw Castle while the players are coming in. And for the purpose of extracting ancestral information of where Wave Echo Cave is from Venom Fang. I was giving them like hints and environmental sort of hints about the fact that there was a dragon in the castle, but I think I would have been a little bit more, a little less subtle about it.
Yeah.
There's a dragon in there.
It's a difficult balance, I feel like, giving clues without making it obvious.
Well, I just feel like if there's a dragon in a castle with you and it's upset, it's going to be really obvious, like right away. Like, oh, there's garish shadows, like spouting from that room from the flames of their breath, and there's roaring, and there's like heat, and there's blah blah blah. Yeah.
My least favorite moment from D&D this week was when players drew dicks all over my map, but that's always my least favorite every week.
Behave yourselves, Jay's players.
Never.
They won't. They refuse. Let's answer questions. Sometimes on the show, we answer questions. And now is one of those times.
Or we talk about Westmarches.
Teach me about Westmarches.
We're going to talk about Westmarches through the vessel of questions.
Lens.
So you touched on it briefly, like in your dungeon crawl, but I had some really general questions as someone who doesn't really know anything about this.
Sure.
That our listeners may also be asking. So is this like a way to play like based on any system, or is it its own system? How does that work?
So theoretically, you could probably run a Westmarches in any system. I mean, you could probably run a Fates Westmarches game or Pathfinder.
Yeah.
I think it was probably developed with Dungeons and Dragons in mind, just because it is sort of that, explore, defeat, get loot, bring it back to base sort of cycle that Dungeons and Dragons naturally aligns with. But I do think that you could probably run a Westmarches of pretty much any kind. Actually, a Monster of the Week Westmarches might be really nice, where you go to a strange magical land that is infested with monsters, and you have to go out, figure out what the monster is, figure out how to defeat it, and go back to base each week. That might be fun.
What is that? Wait, this just made me think of it could be really funny. What was that video game where you had to go and kill monsters and then use them in your cooking?
Oh, Monster Hunter?
Is it Monster Hunter? I was going to say Monster Hunter, and then I didn't want to be like completely wrong. But you could go out, you could take monsters back, and then you could cook them and serve them.
Yeah, you go out, you collect their bits and make armor out of it and stuff like that.
Yeah. There's an ongoing posting on the bulletin board for our game where, so
the bulletin board is a element that I did not mention, but it is also really common and pretty essential in the Westmarches. The bulletin board is like the DM makes a list of quests, and those are available to the players as like optional adventures. So when the 4 players get together, they can pick one of the quests, and the DM sort of has an idea of what to prepare. Since, just letting people loose into a wilderness could be sort of hard to prep for as a DM, you narrow the scope a little bit by giving them specific quest lines that you can then prepare. Yeah. So, sorry. Thanks for bringing that up because I didn't mention that. So, there's a quest in yours?
Yeah. So, there's an ongoing quest where someone will pay like 100 GP for each like right ear of elf pirates that we bring.
Oh, that's very classic.
Yeah.
It's like
pirates.
A weird Stardew Valley.
It's like based in kind of, I see this in fantasy a lot where they're like, bring us back a kobold ear, and it's like proof that you killed the kobold, right? You couldn't have got its ear without killing it, theoretically.
Totally could, though.
That would be pretty funny.
It's more like proof that they don't have an ear anymore.
Right.
Yeah. Generally speaking, though, it's kind of hard to knock an ear off, but in a tabletop game, it might be a little easier than in reality. Okay, let's, so do you have another question, Haley?
Now that we've brought up this interesting bulletin board idea, is every game, like, do the players have to choose something off of that? Can they just be like, I'm going to go do something else? Or is that up to the DM?
Generally speaking, people pick quests off the board just so that it's easier for the DM to prep. Now, obviously, everybody's game is going to be unique to them. So if you guys collectively decide to do a social downtime game and just meet up for 4 hours to just sort of hang out in character, then that might be something that you could run off the cuff without necessarily requiring a DM to prep too much.
So we use what I'd like to call debate rules, which means that as long as we give the DMs enough notice, we can explore whatever they've like brought up in game. So, in the course of a session, something might come up that a certain character or group of characters wants to pursue. And so then they say, hey, DM, I want to learn more about this. And they're pretty open about doing that. And whether it's social or downtime or exploration or combat, will vary based on whatever the quest is. But it might not be an official quest.
Because sometimes the DM will drop stuff like, you're walking through the forest, you see in the distance a mountain, and then you may just be like, oh, I wonder what's on that mountain.
Yeah.
That's a good example of something like that.
And then, so like in our game, there's these things that like keep coming up over and over again. And you start to get the idea that, oh, we're going there eventually. We'll get there eventually. But we had an interesting thing happen where a chimera was stealing fish. No, it wasn't a chimera. Sorry, I got confused because there was a chimera in Monday game. No, it's a neon, Nian. And it is stealing fish barrels from a homesteader that lives outside the city walls or whatever. And we go and we try to investigate more and try to like trap the neon and, ask it like, why are you doing this, et cetera, et cetera. We find out it's like way beyond our ability to influence as level 3 characters. So I think that's actually really interesting because when we finally get to a point in the game where we can actually put pressure on this neon to tell us things or whatever, that'll show growth over time and the passage of time and things like that you don't always get.
Yeah, I think a big part of the Westmarches experience is introducing your players to a dangerous world that is often beyond their ability to influence at first.
Yes.
So that's another like traditional element of the Westmarches. We actually have a question about that here, which is one of the hallmarks of Westmarchian game is danger with a high likelihood of character death. How do we react when characters get life restoration magic?
It's a really good question. We actually have home rules in our game, which I can enumerate here if you're interested.
Sure. Give us a quick overview. What does that look like?
So if we're talking about flat out death, we use, I think it's a critical role variant where a certain number of characters come together and they make a group roll to try to revive the dead person. And the DC to revive increases. You add the number of times that character has been revived in the past to 10. So it gets harder each time you try on a certain character, which I think is interesting. We also have other things, like probably the most important thing in this case is we have persistent death save fails. So if you are down, if you're unconscious and you're making death saving throws, when you stand back up, if you stand back up, you reduce your death saving throw failures by 1, but you still retain that failure. So in comparison, dying is easier. It sort of shows that sort of like stamina aspect. And discourages like using the same tactic over and over again. Maybe you want to switch it up. Maybe you want to do this. Maybe you want to fall back.
Yeah, there's definitely a death yo-yo in 5th edition where
down,
you can
up,
kind
down,
of
up, down, up.
yeah, down, get back up at 2 health, get knocked back down, and your death saves reset every time, so it doesn't really matter how many times it happens.
Yeah.
As long as somebody can spare a healing word bonus action somewhere between your turns, you're going to be okay. So it would definitely discourage that because the death saves would still be accumulating despite the fact that you're being brought back.
Yeah.
Which makes it a little more lethal, or significantly more lethal.
Yeah, and maybe a little more realistic, I guess.
Yeah, exactly, because a person, who's been beaten to hell and back has gone unconscious 4 times, they're not springing back as vitally each time, I imagine. I imagine they're getting worn down over time.
And I have to say that I've gotten a little lax on going and reviving my compatriots sometimes because I'm like, oh, they have at least 3 turns before I have to worry about that. Whereas in this variant, I want to get to them as soon as possible so they don't have that penalty.
Right. And my advice would be the easiest way to... Westmarches actually makes this a little easier than most campaigns because... there's really no stable, continuous, safe access to diamonds in a Westmarches game. So as long as you're not awarding your players diamonds, and they have no real way to buy them because they're out in the wilderness, then there's really no way they can bring people back. Without an access to diamonds, I guess there is... druids have, like, oils and stuff for reincarnate, but that kind of has its own punishment built in. So, you lose your sort of racial synergies that you used to have. I think, control the flow of diamonds. If you don't award diamonds, your players can't bring people back, and that will naturally stimulate the tide of constantly reviving people.
Indeed. We actually currently have a player down, and so the next time we meet, we're going to have to figure out how to deal with that.
You'll have to go on a quest for a diamond mine.
I really like the point that you made about sort of scarcity of spell components specifically. We actually had kind of an interesting through line in the last game that I played where we had a horn that we had taken from one of the sea elves, and we couldn't identify it because no one had the pearl that you needed to do that. So the whole quarter of the last session at the beginning was having the wizard get a pearl. It took a while.
Yeah, that's really cool though. Like, because then it feels earned,
Yeah,
right? Like,
and then the wizard was like, yeah, and I'm gonna charge you all 5 gold pieces each time I I have to use identify for you. And you know, that kind of happens too. It's interesting. I wanted to talk a little bit about the DM situation because
Sure.
Westmarches has some wiggle room, I think, for that. So my campaign has 2 official DMs. We are on like a newly discovered land, and well, it's not newly discovered. There's a human settlement that's been around for a little while. And as we go through, we learn more and more about what was there and what we could find. There were elves there. There was a fallen empire there of like giants and
yeah, classic.
whatever.
D&D is one of those things where there's just like layers of fallen empires, and the further down you dig, the more empires you dig up.
Exactly. So the DM's divided up like one of them is taking like the town and then to the north. And the other one's taking like everything to the south of the town and like the old gods or whatever. So when when we ask to do something that involves like the forest or whatever, we go to one DM. And when we want to, do something that involves the beach or whatever, we go to the other DM. So it's really interesting. And there is some opportunity for other people to jump in and DM. So, for example, my character, in maybe the second or third game they were in, found these really large clay pots, which remind me of like the pots that I think the Romans used to use for like transportation on like sailing ships, very large pots. And like my character was really into them. They wanted to like learn more about them and all about them and whatnot. And they were too heavy for them to carry. So they're still wherever they found them. So I would like, as a DM, like in reality, these pots, like they're not important. But from the DM side, I want to make those pots important. Like I want that
Chekhov's pots.
Well, yeah, I want to like have like a play session where like the pots keep appearing. And people think they're having visions, and what could it be? Oh no, it's like the sea lady of the whales is mad at you, and she's giving you these visions, and she wants you to reach in the pot so she can like get you, or I don't know. But I would love to explore the pot situation.
I feel like if the motivation's there, like that's what's really fun about a Westmarches campaign is that because the groups change up all the time, DMs can switch in and out too.
Yeah.
Like with my cousin's game where he's training up 2 new DMs, as long as they have sort of a unified vision of the setting, the individual adventures can be pretty much anything. So, like, you can run an adventure based on the pots.
Yes.
Yeah.
I really like the idea of Last Stones Day. And because we're in this sort of human settlement, I would love to like DM a game about whatever their big like festival is for the year or whatever.
I think the really exciting thing about a Westmarches game is that because you're always running one-shots, you can kind of treat it like an episodic TV show where each episode can just be like one quirky idea you had and can just explore that to its full extent and then be done with it. Whereas when you're running a longer form adventure, everything needs to have a little bit of meat on its bones where it can last several sessions.
And if people were really interested in something, they could say, like, we want to go back and explore more in that area. And then.
Right. And if a player's interested enough, they could DM that.
Pretty cool. And I was going to ask, so you were talking about the danger level and in player deaths and things like that. So is there, and Jerika, you mentioned that, in your game, you were up against something that you weren't really strong enough to deal with at this point. Like, is there some indicator to players, like, of this is a dangerous area, or is there not? Like, is it just like go over there, and if all of a sudden, like, you are not effective against whatever you're suddenly fighting, you run away? Like, how does that work?
So we didn't actually have any indication, really. We got a little bit of information from a library that was nearby. we didn't get the CR rating or whatever, but
Right.
there was some connection that in the narrative about this creature to the gods. And so maybe that was a super duper hint that none of us picked up on. But it really sort of lended to feelings when we were actually fighting it that, oh, this creature means business. And after it cast darkness and just appeared and we couldn't actually see it or fight it, we were like, okay, well, I guess we're done here.
Yeah, I think that probably the two easiest ways to communicate like difficulty and challenge are, one, you have to establish up front, like, hey, this is a Westmarches, people can die. Be very careful when you're out adventuring. Don't engage things unless you're confident in your abilities versus that thing. Or unless you're sort of forced into an engagement, just understand that probably I wouldn't force you into an engagement that you couldn't handle.
That you couldn't,
So like that sort of play up front. But then the other thing is with the job board, you could maybe give the jobs rankings there on like level of danger or difficulty. And that could just simply be whoever scouted the job in the fiction of your game writes down like, oh yeah, there's a lot of monsters over here. Oh, there's not so many monsters, but there's a lot of like political intrigue over here. That kind of thing. So I think that the job board is
a large reward.
Yeah. Like the rank of the reward. You could just have flat. I mean, it's kind of gamified, so it's maybe a little less in the fiction of the world. But you just have rankings on the mission. Like this is a rank 2 mission, so it's going to be kind of harder than a rank 1 mission.
So rank. Ooh, smelly.
Yeah. But yeah, that's going to help. And then obviously as the DM, you can just do your best to telegraph when an encounter is maybe not. Like casting darkness on the party right in the first round is a great way to telegraph that they're not going to be super effectual here without actually doing damage. It's not like you cast Cone of Cold on the party and knocked them all unconscious.
Right, yeah.
You casted darkness, which just made them ineffectual. And then suddenly they're like, okay, well, if we can't do anything, we can't do anything here. That's actually one of our questions is, what are the common pitfalls of a Westmarches game? And the DM talks about how they wanted to DM and they thought about a Westmarches and it sounded kind of intriguing, but then when they started thinking about it, it sort of became daunting to them, and they eventually just sort of went to Reddit and asked for help, which is, I think, fair. But yeah, one of the common pitfalls of Westmarches, your players have to be into the idea of maybe rolling up a new character. Your players have to be into the idea of exploring an area. And I think another one that people maybe don't think about too much is like there's not a whole lot of social RP in a Westmarches most of the time, except for between the party.
Well,
like yeah.
So our base camp is in an inn.
Okay. Well, yeah, that helps.
We have like a cast of characters in the inn, and again, it's based in like this town, so we do have people we can interact with. I would say by and large, we interact with party members the most, obviously, but I can always be like, hey, barkeep, like this or that, so there is like a slew of NPCs that we can kind of harass if we want to.
Yeah, so your base camp is a situation where you might want to build in that social element, because as you're exploring into the wilderness, there's not going to be a whole lot of times where you meet. It depends on your Westmarches setting too. If you're exploring, say, an elven forest, you might run into bands of elves here and there that then you have social interactions with. But my cousin is running a game where they are literally exploring an unexplored continent, and there's nobody on the island but the party. And so he constantly struggles with how to introduce social RP and stuff that's not just combat encounters into the game. Yeah. So we're all the time coming up with puzzles or traps or situations that are more interesting than just combat. Like a very good one we did recently, there was they came across some carrion crawlers, which are these gross little bugs that eat corpses. They were in a swamp, and there were just too many carrion crawlers to fight. There were just too many. But they had these flowers that, if they knocked it into the swamp, the flowers would react with the swamp water and would create a gas that the carrion crawlers hated. So they had to figure out how to manage these flowers to create a path through this swarm of carrion crawlers to get out of there. And so that was a way of taking a combat encounter and turning it into sort of like a puzzle / role-play encounter. And I think you have to be kind of creative and careful with that kind of stuff because, yeah, it can be just sort of like a combat slog. Like if you're just going out into the jungles and fighting a bunch of different things.
So in our game, first session, there was established that there are giant bees making ground hive under this town. Okay. And the tunnels that the bees create connect to ruins.
Oh, okay,
and so first we had to negotiate with the bees and figure out why they were there and blah, blah, blah. But long story short, it was the praying mantis. Anyway, so, but now because we help the bees, we have access to their tunnels. And so we can use that to do exploration missions. I have found that those tend to like stop off or end at maybe less than ideal points. It's like, oh, we've gone as far as we can today. Okay, we'll come back later and map out the rest of the ruins or whatever.
Yeah, because it's like a giant network and it's difficult to explore that in one session.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's a situation where you might want like a sort of like a quick travel mechanic. So maybe each time you finish off your exploration, you have like a forward operating base you get to set up, and then you just get to start from there next time. Yeah. So that way you're always making progress, so to speak. Yeah. Yeah, that's an interesting... I like that your game is more social. I think that one of the things I would struggle with as a Westmarches game DM is I like to create NPCs and stuff like that, and I don't necessarily think I would want to play on like an empty island.
Right, exactly.
Yeah, I want people to talk to.
I feel like you could do some sort of interesting like exploration where you're like collecting specimens and doing things, but then there's also like you have to have the right relationships with vendors to get the things you need so that you can mix the two things together.
I tell you what I think I would want to do as a Westmarches. I think I would want to do like a Lewis and Clark style exploration.
That's what I was thinking. Like Lewis and Clark like mapping situation, or like
like you start down on West Coast town and you're trying to reach East Coast town, and how you get there is up to you. Might be kind of fun.
Yeah, like, or you're going to go and chart a new continent, but maybe it's not like empty. Maybe you run into like local peoples and then you have to work with them.
Yeah, you just don't want to accidentally create colonialism the game.
I was gonna say, you just need to not make it colonization. It's gotta be like, let us learn about your culture and then we will leave.
Yeah, that's been sort of one of my problems with my my Tuesday game is they're settling some islands. And so it's like, oh boy, gotta walk a fine line. All these islands have no, and like the cop-out answer is these are uninhabited islands. That's like
nobody lives here.
No one lives here. It's okay. It's ethically okay. The island that they've landed on, the people don't want to live there, and are there because of like a curse. And so that's sort of like the ethical cop-out I've done. So that way they don't feel bad about it. No. Yeah. They're actually helping them get rid of the curse, and then they get the island. That's sort of my my way of avoiding colonialism the game, which can be sort of a problem with Westmarches if that's your goal is to like set up a town or something. Then hopefully there's no natives. It's just like
I liked Jerika, thing that I think sounds positive in that regard about your game is that you're already in an established town and you're doing things to like help that.
Yeah, I like it, and sort of how we get to the edge of the wilderness is that this town is not like super like well off. It's not a water deep, okay? So
it's more like Westmarches.
Yeah, it's like almost
it's the edge of civilization.
Right. It's like a sort of like a frontier town, if you will. So
So more like
that's a great word.
Reduced resources and things like that, and things that people don't know that they would like to know, and then like weird happenings, like your fish barrel gets stolen or whatever. So Yeah, so I think that actually having like a small base of some kind that has NPCs in it is actually really useful.
That's also good because if somebody dies, it gives an explanation for where their replacement
Right.
comes from.
That's true.
I think in my cousin's game, they have like a timeline. So when they establish their base, a ship is coming in like 3 months to resupply them, a new ship. So they have like 3 months to figure out how to get that Kraken out of the harbor before their new ship gets wrecked, just like the old one does. Because they can't warn the new ship because they have no way of communicating with them. So yeah, they have like 3 months to get this Kraken out of the harbor. But once the ship arrives, they will have like a city. And then they will have replacement NPCs and stuff like that. And until then, I think that if they die, they're just stuck for a little while, which is not ideal. So far, nobody has died. But yeah, it's just like because they don't have an in-narrative explanation for where new people come from. There's nobody on the island, and they don't have any way of supporting new people coming in. I think he actually made up a plot hook that a ship had gotten lost at sea, and so those people might be here on the island somewhere. But that's like the only other hook to get people new player characters. So having a forward operating civilization point at the edge of your campaign is probably a good idea. But I think having them completely isolated on the island is great for tension.
Yeah.
It's great for like drama.
Right.
Yeah, we're alone. We've got to build our civilization. It's kind of like that Crusoe family, Swiss Family Robinson feeling, where they're
Robinson
like making the base
Crusoe.
from scratch. Yeah, combine the two things, and that's it.
It reminds me of Banished. There was like a town building game, kind of like SimCity, but you're starting from like the wilderness.
Haley, you were trying to say something?
Yes, I wanted to kind of loop back to the question we were answering about potential pitfalls.
Mm-hmm.
And one thing that I was going to say just from experience, and it kind of goes back to just making sure that everyone's on board for this type of game being really important, because I feel like sometimes if you've played a lot of D&D specifically, like you're sort of used to, even if it's a sort of sandboxy world, it's like, okay, well, in a meta level, like my DM wouldn't put something here that like we're kind of like traveling from point A to point B, and everything that we encounter along the way gets progressively harder as we level up. And so I think you need to make sure that your players know that it's more Breath of the Wild.
Yeah. You can totally run into a guardian and be completely
Be like, what is this thing?
Yeah.
I'm dead now. But also that like people need to also be okay with like backing off of a fight.
Yeah.
Like I think a lot of times you see.
I think people need to be more okay with that in general. In D&D.
I think maybe Westmarches could be a good game for personal growth for some people.
Yeah.
I prescribe a course of Westmarches games to learn when to back down. No, but I think sometimes it is like, oh, we have to win. We have to win the game. We have to win the fight. But sometimes that can end with death. And it seems like that's particularly more important to consider in a game like this. So just going back to what you said about making sure that everyone knows what they're signing up for.
It reminds me a little bit of Chult in that way. I guess Chult is sort of like a Westmarches light at the first half of it anyway, where you're just sort of exploring the unknown continent of Chult, the jungles, and you don't know what you're going to run across. It's sort of in that vein of like exploratory delving. You can run into a Tyrannosaurus in Chult. A Tyrannosaurus that vomits zombies. And I don't think they expect you to fight it. I think they expect you to run. But players would like to fight it. And so it can be it's all about setting expectations. It's like, hey, not everything in this module you can win against. Against the Storm King's Thunder, I just combined two adventures. Storm King's Thunder.
Wait.
Yeah. Storm King's Thunder is another one where you're expected to run away from encounters a lot because you can't fight 3 or 4 giants at low level. So that's another one where PCs can find it like really difficult. And by difficult, I think they mean we die a lot because you are fighting these giants that the game designers never intended you to fight, but they didn't build the world from the perspective of like, you can tackle everything you come across. They built it from like, this is a world and some things are just beyond your control. Yeah. Communicating that can be a real pain.
Yeah.
Because you don't want your players to think like, I'm picking on you, so I put a big monster in here. You just want to be like, this is a scary place, and big monsters are here. But at the same time, it can feel like the other thing when you're a player. Hey, why did you put this CR-14 monster in front of a level 3 party? That doesn't seem fair. Well, the world's not fair, buddy.
Indeed.
The world's not fair. This was cool. I think this premise is very cool. I saw you guys talking about it in chat one day, and I was like, I'll read this later, and then I didn't. And
I think it would be something that would suit you too, Haley, because it's drop in, drop out, so there's not the pressure to assign time to it every week. But at the same time, like, you can still get really invested in your character and in the world, and you can kind of read people's journals, and that's kind of fun in its own way. Cool.
Yeah, it seems like it gives like an area for RP outside of the RP where it's like a little bit of that like text-based, like you tell your stories or you like brag about your accomplishments to your friends who weren't there, and then like now you want to go and play because you want to be able to brag about your accomplishments. Like,
absolutely. Cool. As always, thank you so much for joining us on another episode of Insight Check. We really appreciate you. We took last week off. We took the week before last off. Last week, we released a Small Folk Adventure, so go check that out if you haven't listened to it yet. It's really good, and the music is amazing. You can check us out on Twitch or Twitter at Insight Check Pod for both. You can also follow us on iTunes or any of your favorite podcast listening apps. Please leave us a review if you enjoy the show, because it really helps us to spread the word. That's the only way that we get the word out about the show is through reviews. Thanks so much to Vinswept for our intro and outro, Never Stand Alone. It's amazing, and they have a ton of music that you can go check out on their website for your D&D games. Thanks so much to Amy T. Falcone, official Wizards of the Coast affiliated artist, for our avatars and our branding. Without you, we wouldn't have faces, and that would be sad.
Answering your cues from our collective is this.
Was
Insight Check!
the new what's that game series? The game series where you like play in a village. What's the Nintendo game? Animal Farm?
Animal Crossing?
Animal Crossing, that's it.
It's the best.
Let's sign off before we get too far into this discussion.
All right. Well, bye.
Wait, I think we have a thing that we do. It's been a while.
Yeah.